رحمن يا رحيم.
Time is just gone 13 minutes past 9 as we continue with the broadcast this morning right here on Salam Media, News and Views it is. And the next 45 minutes, to a large extent, we will be focusing on local issues. Shortly, we'll be joined by leader of Change Starts Now, Roger Jardine. We're talking about their manifesto. We also will be joined by award-winning journalist and author of the book Who Will Rule South Africa, Kanita Hunter. And this is an event that we are hosting next week in Durban. And looking at the lucrative Muslim vote who will govern South Africa as we take a look ahead at elections 2024. And also joining with Africa Muslims Agency towards the end of the broadcast. Their ladies team or their delegation is in Afghanistan right now. But now, straight away, we're going across to be joined by Roger Jardine, who is a leader of Change Starts Now. Roger, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Roger, yeah, it's interesting, that obviously change starts now, and this is extremely relevant because this country has been looking for a change for a very, very long time. And since our democracy, we've heard the slogans, the popular slogan of the ANC, a better life for all. 30 years later, that hasn't happened. And we know where we are at this point in time, yet we are in a country that has got so much potential, a country that has never been short of resources, a country that has fantastic weather. We've got so much going for us, yet it is sad that this country has degenerated to the extent that it has. And this is the reason why, we talking to yourself, talking about change starts now, and also this change charter, this manifesto of hope that you are speaking of.
Good morning again, and thank you very much. I think the additional characteristic that we have is amazing people, and I think we need to now move to putting people at the center of all of our thinking. I've been traveling, getting out and about, going to taxi ranks, flower markets, community youth centers. And one of the problems, and the way the problem manifests, is that our people feel that they are not seen. On the first day of school, I went to school in Sharpeville that hasn't had electricity for 3 years. And I asked the principal, "What's the plan?" And she said, "There's no plan. They haven't heard anything. They don't know what's going to happen. The classes are cold and dark in winter." And so I think at the center of any new government program has to be the restoration of dignity of the people of this country, and for people to be seen again. And unfortunately, our party political system tends to put parties at the center of politics and not people at the center of politics. So our Change manifesto for hope, is really a vision for how do we put South Africa back on a footing, or on what we call the change lane, where we can focus on people. I mean, we know that we have a very serious social crisis. Millions of people go to bed hungry. Crime affects all of us. Um, and yet our economy is being mismanaged. So the manifesto focuses quite heavily on how do we get our economy back on track. And as part of that, we have two key proposals in the manifesto. One is to raise a 500 billion rand fund through what we call the social solidarity tax. And the second one is, how do we leverage the private sector so that we can gain access to up to R1 trillion or more in private sector capital, so that we don't see looking after our people as next in line to first fixing the economy. We have to intervene urgently, and the time is now. So the manifesto is really a management plan. It's a turnaround plan. It's a plan that speaks to the balance sheet, the financial resources of the government. And we also think we know how to mobilize that finance and where to find the people to get South Africa going.
Yes, Roger. In fact, what you are saying is extremely important because you describe it as a management plan, and a management plan needs to be actions. It's got to be action driven because right up front in your manifesto, you speak about people tapping into their imagination, and what people are actually going through, what people are feeling, the feeling of being discarded, the feeling of being abandoned. And that is a message that comes out very, very strongly. And this is the reason why this management plan and these practical steps that you speak about are so important. And this is the reason why your manifesto speaks so strongly about these action plans.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, again, it's about dignity. I have so much faith in the people of this country. You know, you travel around and talk to them, and people want to better their lives and help others. You know, South Africans of all colors and cultures, we are all helping each other. I can't think of one person uh, who isn't helping a neighbor or a neighbor's child or assisting with food or school fees or hospital bills or something. I mean, that spirit prevails on the ground in this country. And it's just part of who we are as South Africans. And I think what we've lost along the way is we've also stopped talking about who are we as South Africans. We've been talking about state capture and tenders and corruption and load shedding and all of these things because it's been top of mind. But ultimately, a nation that wants to move forward together needs to have a common consciousness. And so, you know, we went out and spoke to 9,000 South Africans across the country, urban and rural, and we got some amazing feedback from them. And no surprises, the number one issue on the minds of every South African is the need for jobs, employment. I mean, with that comes dignity. And so the manifesto focuses very sharply on how we're going to create jobs. And the plans in there, I mean, you know, South Africa's had policy jamboree for for a long time. There's a lot of ideas out there, and they're good ideas. For example, the National Development Plan that was published in 2012 by the government said if we spend 30% of 30% of GDP on infrastructure, we should be able to reduce unemployment to 10%. It is now 2024. We're sitting at 14.5%. By the way, Kenya is at 20%. So we modeled that, and we think we can get infrastructure spend up to 22% and create 5 million jobs. We didn't suck that number out of our thumbs, and in so doing, reduce unemployment by 37%. So what differentiates this charter is it doesn't just tell South Africans what the problem is, because we already know what the problem is. It says how we intend to address it. And so that number one issue that's on the minds of every South African is a very sharp focus up front in the manifesto on how we're going to resource the state so that we can create jobs and we can literally start to put people out of their misery. I think South Africans want jobs more than anything else. It's an issue of dignity. And so you ask, why hasn't it happened up until now? Because the plans have been there, and there are a whole range of other plans out there. For example, everyone understands, if you speak to any expert, if we can fix ESCOM, we can lift our GDP growth from 1% or so to 2.5%, and with that will come jobs. So why hasn't all of this happened? Our current political establishment is very preoccupied by the wrong things. They're focusing on party dynamics, soap operas, political navel gazing, and nothing gets done. And so our view is that it's time we have some new voices in the room with fresh energy, ready to implement these things. You know, in the middle of the last century, the idea that government was about presenting reams of policy and then passing it, and then everybody sits back and think, okay, now we have the policy, the job is done. That's not a modern approach to the way to run a state. In governance in 2024, you must focus on project delivery and management. And that is the thrust that we will bring into the next government.
Well, definitely, and your manifesto speaks to a lot of the things that we already know about. Whether we're talking about electricity, whether we're talking about lack of infrastructure development, the poverty, the social ills, all of it that your manifesto speaks about. But again, the key issue is you can have as many policies as you want, but if you don't prioritize the implementation of these policies, and this is exactly what you are saying, that it requires the courage, because I'm just looking at your manifesto right now. You speak about courageous fixes, because this is exactly what it is. We will see many manifestos come through from many political parties, but do they have the courage and to talk about practical implementation, practical fixes? And this requires courage.
It does. I'll give you. It absolutely does. And I think there's another area where we all have to be courageous. We know that the way public sector procurement has been managed, it has led to the wrong outcome for the people of this country. Governments around the world use procurement to basically create some kind of leverage around national policy goals and an agenda. That's not an unusual thing. What we've seen happening here is under the broad banner of inclusion, 3 or 4 people with no experience in a particular field have been getting major state contracts. And I'm just speaking generally and generically. And there's so many anecdotes of towns across this country where they're onto their second or third water provision contract, and there's still no water there. And the reason for that is that the way this procurement uh, exercise is rolled out, it's gone to people and they've made lots of money, and it's been called inclusion. And we haven't talked about the thousands of people who are excluded from services because of the lack of technical skills on the part of some of these so-called service providers. And so that's going to be a very important, that will have to be a very important focus going into the future if we want to bring relief to the people of this country in the provision of basic services. You know, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is there's absolutely no reason why our public hospitals have to be such a shambles. 90% of South Africans use public hospitals as the first and ultimate resort of healthcare. And we all know when people go there what the experiences are like. And so we'll have to focus on how do we fix public healthcare in this country. It's a basic human right. It's not a privilege to go to a public hospital and get care. It's a measure of a society's care for its people if it can provide adequate healthcare and of a high quality. And we need to restore that. So in all of the touch points that a citizen has with public goods like hospitals, roads, police, water, etc., we have to make sure that our people feel seen, because like the principal in Sharpeville, who's been running a school without electricity for 3 years, she just throws her hands up in the air. She has no clue as to when this will end. Surely by now somebody should have sat with her and said, these are resource constraints, but by June or August or the end of next year or something, there's a plan. But they're just not seen. And so we all need the courage. And part of that courage also is our leaders mustn't hide from the people. Part of that courage is to go and to hear and to take the anger and to translate it into action. And so I think we definitely need to change the politics, because if we don't, we're going to have a very different conversation in 2029 when our next election is after this one. And so, you know, my message to every South African is get out and vote. There are consequences to the way we've all been voting. When we make our mark, let's pause and think about the consequences. Are we voting for more of the same, or do we want change? And I say choose the change lane.
Well, certainly, and also I think, Roger, I see even in your towards the end of the your manifesto, you're speaking about the reset button, because this is where we are at this point in time. We need to press that reset button, because we cannot go on with how we have been going on in the last few years as well. And this is the reason why this election is going to be one of the most crucial elections for this country. And as you mentioned, in 5 years' time, you don't want to be sitting with the situation. And again, we have to be honest, and we have to be open about this, that this country seriously needs change, but also more importantly, this country needs to be rebuilt to what we want it to be.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that reset happens at the polls. And again, every South African needs to exercise their right as sovereign citizens to press that reset button. And part of that reset button also means that we need to be more engaged in our communities. I've met an amazing group of people who are just getting on with it. Um, but the state has to come to the party as well in terms of being responsive, in terms of being accountable. Perhaps one more example from the manifesto. We have a section on crime and policing in there. And one of the things that's very clear from talking to uh, experts in the issue of crime and security is that crime is local. You know, crimes don't happen nationally; they happen locally in communities, in suburbs, and that sort of thing. And so we have to treat the management of crime as a local issue, and that means that in a model going forward, our local police stations need to be more accountable to the communities in which they operate. And that means that more management control, more accountability. Personally, I think if a station commander was well known in his or her area of responsibility, people can reach out, there can be a relationship, there can be a responsiveness, and most importantly, there can be an accountability. The present model is not working. It is 30 years later. I think it's time for us to pause and to think about what has worked and what can we improve on and what is best practice. And I think in the area of policing, localizing it is definitely the way to go. And all of the international models show that.
Well, Roger, thank you very much for that. And we also want to remind our listeners, our viewers, that you have got a website. It's called changestartsnow.org.za, where we have been talking about this change charter, about this manifesto as well. All the details are available on your website. But for now, Roger, and I'm sure we will be having future engagements in the build up to the elections as well. But we thank you for your time and all the best to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Roger Jardine, leader of Change Starts Now, with us talking about their manifesto, which they have called the Change Charter. And this is a manifesto of hope. And we will bring you a lot more coverage as we build up to the elections on the 29th of May. And talking about elections, the lucrative Muslim vote, who will govern South Africa. Next up, we'll be joined by award winning editor of For Politics and Opinion for News 24, Kanita Hunter, and also Dr. Faisal Suleiman. Samnet, we will be talking about this gripping account of South Africa, 30 years of democracy, but it is time to move on. And this is what we're talking about. This is an event, and we'd like to remind our listeners, our viewers this morning, that this is an event that we, Salam Media, will be hosting at the Andalus Boutique Hotel in Morningside in Durban. That's next Friday, the 1st of March, from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. There will be tickets on sale. It is going to be limited. A fair amount of tickets have been sold already. So please book your space, and we will give you a lot more details when we have this discussion with Kanita Hunter and Faisal Suleiman.